Having made videos on different groups of champions in League of Legends, it seems the community has a penchant for putting members of a similar vibe or feel in the same category. Two in particular that I went over were the 4 Horsewomen and then later 4 Horsemen of top lane, in which I discussed the 2 quartets of female and male champions respectively that were considered among the most notorious and meta-warping top laners of all time, in that they basically comprised the meta for 90% of the year. I had a lot of fun making those videos because it was both an opportunity for me to document why exactly they were, or should I say still are, so dominant, as well as a chance for me to basically complain about how annoying they are to play against. This one isn't necessarily an archetype of champions endemic to a singular role or niche, rather it concerns the time they came out. A term that frequently circulates throughout modern day parlance is 200 years, which I'm sure by this point requires no explanation on the meaning. Shortly after that infamous tweet, however, came a series of new releases that people saw fit to associate the term with. Said releases have often been accredited for being the proverbial inflection point between the league we all like to reminisce over and the league we have today, coincidentally beginning right at the end of the first decade. For today, I wanted to discuss the original 200 Years champions, analyzing what was so special about them, and how their inclusion completely altered the direction of champion design thereafter. People have a tendency to use 200 Years pretty loosely, whether a champion is deserving of such a title differs from person to person, but we can at the very least ascertain a good starting point for when champions began to feel like they were doing far more than they rightfully had any reason to. Timeline-wise, the moment when reception towards new champions went from admire and excitement to apprehension, if not frustration, began around 2018 with the releases of Kai'Sa, Pyke, Sylas, Yuumi, and Qiyana.
Kai'Sa has 2 passives.
Frustrating champions were a thing in the past, mind you, but there was a measure of tolerance to them in the sense that they technically were still adhering to rules and expectations of their class. At worst, they were bending the rules. It wasn't until Season 8 and 9 when new champions were beginning to actively disregard the rules, if not outright break our preconceived notions on what a class of characters are meant to do. Kai'Sa, for example, was considered by many to be one of the most overpowered ADCs in the game for seemingly being able to do it all, near to the point where you can make a reasonable case that she didn't need a support to protect her when she could protect herself, not to mention it being next to unheard of for a marksman to be allowed to play for a back to front win condition. Pyke as well, one of the most egregious additions to the game, an assassin support who literally wanted to KS his team, for ironically the benefit of the team. Then you had Qiyana, an assassin that was pretty dangerous in teamfights if not more so, the one scenario where you'd expect assassins to be weak in. More than these champions crossing the line, it became increasingly more apparent that they were being given tools to cover more circumstances, which in turn led to better skill expression and play, but unfortunately at the expense of the opponent having less ways to shut them down. The reason everyone lost their minds over Lutzberg's tweet was because players were already beginning to raise an eyebrow at new champion design. Seeing the actual 200 Years champs come out after the tweet was almost like them doubling down on it. The next year and a half would be marked with virtually every single new addition to the roster feeling like overpowered and overloaded upgrades to existing cast members or entirely novel concepts that fundamentally shattered the boundaries we expected champions to have. It all began with the 200 Years man himself, Aphelios. Having been around for close to 6 years now, people don't look at Aphelios with the same horror and disgust they did in the past, which might just be an indication of how jaded and desensitized we've gotten, but at the time his entire design was simply unprecedented. Transformation-based champions existed in the past who alternated between 2 stances, but Aphelios had effectively 5, and when you consider the total number of unique weapon combinations, he would have far more than 5. Each weapon type only came with a single ability to even things out, but just the idea that Aphelios had 5 different weapons completely rewrote our understanding of what a champion should be capable of. Mind you, it was somewhat exacerbated by the fact that with that many weapons, people had no idea what Aphelios did for the first year of his inclusion. Naturally, people fear and hate what they don't understand, although in defense of everyone, because Aphelios had so much going for him, trying to give him the same power budget as everyone else would simply result in him being way stronger than everyone else. Having access to that many options necessitates that each option be slightly weaker to balance out the quantity and quality disparity. So while the montages of Aphelios 1v9ing was just a glaring oversight by Riot, nowadays he's more aligned with everyone else in what he can do, but it took a long time for him to get there. Aphelios in particular would give way to marksmen having way less constraints and capability than ever before, which actually led to the very next marksman that came out after, Samira, suffering from the same issues where her initial performance was so staggering due in part to her being able to do so much. The idea of a marksman rushing headfirst into the enemy team like some kind of diver champion and nuking everyone was outright not within the realm of possibility for many of us. The League community up until that point had a mental image of what a marksman was good at and what they were bad at, what they were supposed to do and what they had to avoid. There would be nuance between marksmen, but generally you could give the label as squishy, immobile, or support reliant to any of the older ones and they would fit the bill almost to the T. You could infer the likes of Aphrow, Samira, Zeri, Neela, Smolder, etc. They all broke the rules in one way or another. Yunara would be the first marksman in literally almost a decade whom you can actually consider a traditional marksman, quote-unquote. Aphelios was that starting point. His inclusion was a green light for Riot to start pushing the envelope on what 80 carries were expected to do, which is why so many people praised Yunara for being straightforward and not overloaded. When you take the marksman that came out between Aphelios and Yunara, it becomes more understandable in that respect. Aphelios was the first 200 years champion, and he came out at the tail end of 2019. 2020 and 2021 was when it really started to go off the rails. First came Set, another juggernaut many considered a bit too capable, although in retrospect it was probably just an issue of him being overtuned instead of overloaded. Still though, abilities like Kingmaker were clear examples of champions being given way higher ceilings of playmaking potential than ever before. Following Sen and Lilia, the next 7 champions to come out would solidify the rise of modern-day overloaded champions. Most people regard in late 2020, early 2021 as the era of 200 years. Yona, Samira, Seraphine, Rel, Viego, Gwen, and Akshan took champion design to a whole new dimension, each with a repertoire far exceeding their predecessors in scale and scope. Yona, Samira, Viego, Gwen, and Akshan's infamy have been well documented already, but even Seraphine and Rel could fall into this definition too. Part of why Seraphine got so much backlash was because people regarded her as a modernized and overloaded version of Sona. Conceptually speaking, that's not an outlandish claim to make. They both had auras and big team fight ultimates, but Seraphine felt like she could simply just do more. Even though in the eyes of many, Seraphine's not much of a meta issue currently, at the time she effectively powercrept Sona by way of the sheer amount of stuff in her kit. More range, potentially stronger healing and shielding, AoE crowd control, and poke. I would say Rel's the most interesting example though, because people were greatly underwhelmed by her when she first came out. However, even for her, you could argue Riot was trying to make the next big tank support champion by stuffing her with as much as they could. Listing everything one after another, it's easy to see how that could be the case. Passive would let you steal armor and magic resist off every target you hit. Shattering Strike was a low cooldown frontal thrust that instantly destroyed shields and could heal herself and her tethered ally. Ferromancy Crashdown was a humongous AoE knockup, basically serving as an Alistar WQ in one ability, while Mount Up gave her an old Volibear Q. Attract and Repel was an AoE stun between her and her tethered ally, and then Magnus Storm was also a grouping tool. Even before getting reworked, Rel carried the reputation of being a one-woman engager. She had so much AoE engage and crowd control that even if the other 4 members of her team had none whatsoever, that would not be a problem. If your goal was a 5v5 teamfight engage and mass tanking, Rel far eclipsed any other tank support in the game, even the super crowd control heavy ones like Nautilus, Leona, and Alistar. As you know though, on paper and in practice are 2 different applications when you factor balance into the equation, but it's clear based on their designs that even the non-200 years champions, Rel and Seraphine, were trying to one-up their respective archetypes. You can imagine how badly the actual 200 years champions turned out to be. I would go as far as to say the reason most new champions coincidentally all happen to have aspects of 1v9ing in their kit is because of Yona, Samira, Viego, Gwen, and Akshan. It's no secret that among modern releases, there's a disproportionately high number of Slayer champions. Beginning from Akshan and up to Yunara, there have been 16 new releases, including the aforementioned 2. Of the 16, 7 of them belong to either the Assassin or Skirmisher class. Among the remaining 9, 3 more of them consist of champions who either presently or historically had moments of extreme notoriety through their ability to quote-unquote 1v9 games and or having had unusually high win rates or role flexibility at the time of their release. Mel, Zeri, and Smolder. I'm sure everyone remembers Smolder and Zeri being flexed in top, mid, and ADC. Meanwhile, Zeri had like a 55% win rate and 50% ban rate when she first came out. Effectively speaking, more than half of all champions that came out after the original 200 years were also 200 years in some way, shape, or form. But what exactly made Yona, Samira, Viego, Gwen, and Akshan so problematic? Alongside their propensity to become shonen protagonists and gain god powers that beat everyone under the sun, around this time is when nearly every champion without fail began having some semblance of assured value and exponential gain. What do I mean by assured value? Typically, assured value refers to any property or ability on a champion that retains its usefulness and contribution irrespective of how fed they are. Crowd control, for instance, would fit into this definition. A Malphite ultimate carries the same threat regardless of if he's 0-10 or 10-0. Yasuo could die 100 times over and still shut down projectile-based attackers by way of his W. For these champions in particular, they pretty much all have something that guarantees value to the team. Yona has % health damage, something that scales based off enemy stats, not his own, along with 2 AoE knockups. Samira has Blade Whirl, same thing as Yasuo W essentially. Viego has % health damage, along with the ability to turn into enemy champions, discarding his own value in favor of someone with ideally more pressure than him. You then have Gwen with seemingly more % health damage than half the roster combined. Akshan is going rogue, he merely needs to score an assist on a champion to revive his teammates. These champions can always do something for the team that makes it so the enemy team has to stop them, no matter how irrelevant they may be. Conversely, these champions are also among the most difficult to shut down when they get a lead because they get that much more out of it. A 5-0 Lee Sin, Pantheon or Xerath might be problematic, but a 5-0 Viego or Yone is a significantly greater threat. Each of them has something whose value multiplies much more than everyone else's. In the case of Viego, for example, being fed allows him to get off more resets, which in turn allows him to exercise his advantage state far more often. Gwen being fed gives him more % health damage, more healing out that % health damage, more true damage, and more armor and magic resist. She gets stronger in every possible way and in ways that can't easily be countered. Akshan being fed enables him to score kills more easily to then revive teammates, making his entire team more difficult to shut down. Samira can reset over and over on you to pentakill your whole team. Why this matters so much is because due to how much these champions can 1v9 games, naturally they become quite popular. Viego and Yone, for instance, are two of the most popular champions in the game to this day. The Slayer archetype overall is one of the most heavily played classes in the game owing to their high speed, self-sufficiency, and strong damage output. As such, Riot has a monetary incentive to make more of them. For the sake of fairness, they obviously have to still release members of other classes, but those other members consistently do worse in popularity than marksmen, assassins, and skirmishers. Milio and Renata are cool supports, but you have a million more people playing Bel'Veth, Cassante, Ambessa, and Smolder. It becomes a recurring feedback loop essentially, and again it makes perfect sense why. Yone, Viego, Silas, Ambessa, Gwen, unless they get nerfed into oblivion, they get played all year round because of the implied agency they have, something I went over in my video on always popular champions. I'd wager most of the time a more simplistic, straightforward champion like Annie, Malphite, or Amumu can be more reliable and consistent for the team, and even win more games than a Viego, Bel'Veth, or Mel. But the idea of being able to blow up the entire team or style on them makes people gravitate more towards those type of champions. It's not just the players either, spectators get a kick out of it too. No one wants to watch a wet noodle fight between a Maokai and Nautilus because it's not particularly engaging to play or watch. However, a high-octane battle between a Cassante and Riven or Viego and Bel'Veth leads to a more engaging viewing experience. For as absurd and rage-inducing as Aphelios was, well, with how many times he 1v9 pentakilled, that in and of itself was partly the reason Riot wanted to make more 200 years champions. It's basically rage bait. Watching crazy LCS 1v9 moments like Aphelios throwing an Inferno Moonlight Vigil on a clumped up enemy team and watching them all explode, or turbo drain tanking with Severum and Cressendom back when Death Stance had lifesteal. Those elicit clicks and views, not a tank top laner slowly beating something to death. Of course, absurdity can come in the form of anything. There's no rule saying it has to be on a fast hyper-mobile champion. Always one-shotting people with a full HP Mundo or Balsa Scenting Scion became running fads for a while, and they're both tanks, but statistically speaking, the more 200 years a champion is, aggravating as they are, they ultimately get more engagement, not just in the people who play them and potentially buy their skins, but also for viewership. Think about it, would you rather Faker play Karma or Vladimir, or would you rather he play Silas or Zed? The issue that I think Riot failed to take notice of until only recently was that there was a line of acceptance in that regard, and in their enthusiasm, they went a bit too far, creating champions that were too outlandish in scope and capability. To their credit, it's cool that they're beginning to backpedal on things a bit with the advent of Yunara. She's a strong champion with good playmaking potential, which only goes to show you that you don't have to give all these crazy mechanics and whatnot to make an entertaining champion. Anyway, what do you guys think of the 200 years champions? Do you think we overreacted to them in hindsight, or were they truly as bad as everyone made them out to be, and the only reason they don't get the same amount of backlash that they did before was because we just got used to them? Let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other champion discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.